And so, so it's only from 3 to 3:30.
Yeah, well, you know what? That's the designated time that they absolutely are in there for sure. But usually they're in there beforehand. And they're very nice. So usually they see visitors even outside of that time.
Right.
They'll come out of what they're doing and
they'll
speak
still
to you.
they'll just go ahead and let you. Right.
You can see everything that they're doing while they're working.
Now, the product that I realized was actually a talent later on is, you know, I was joking with my wife just this morning. I was a kid in 3rd grade that everyone else in the room would talk, but then as soon as I said anything, I'd get in trouble. My voice has carried my entire life. Some people say things that are a little bit less, they're much more negative about that. They say you have a big mouth. I do. So you're going to hear me. My problem is not that whether you're going to hear me really. I just don't want the other group to be disturbed. So the closer you get, the better. First, let me introduce myself to you, because I know I see a few new faces. My name is Jabari Osaze, and I am going to be your guide this afternoon for this amazing experience. I want to say thank you so much for coming, because I know on a beautiful Saturday there's so many other things you could be doing. When we have this sized group on a Saturday, we know that you are the committee. You're the folks that are truly interested in uncovering the true story of the history of African people. And so that is a blessed act. It's nearly a revolutionary act, and I want to thank you for partaking in it. Before I go further, I want to go ahead and introduce you to Zori. He's actually my nephew, and he's here, he's learning, and he's also going to help us with some administration. So if you have any questions, you can also ask him as well. Now let me say to you that I'm here from an organization called the Center for the Restoration of Bond. Some of you are familiar with the organization. In fact, some of you have actually taken classes with the center. Raise your hand if you've taken a class, or two. One here, one there. There's at least one more person that's scheduled to be here. So some of the folks here, when you hear me ask questions, yes, you may not have known that this is a participatory activity. It's not theater. So I'm going to ask you questions. If you see these two answering a lot of questions, they're ringers. Okay, they've been studying this for some time, and they'll be able to certainly interact on a different level. But I know many of you have also been doing quite a bit of work as well. As I've interacted with some of you, I know that you're actually doing quite a bit of work to understand what has transpired for African people, not just over 500 years, which is what we usually stop at, but over 5,000 years. And that's truly the story that we need to become more acquainted with. I've been studying ancient Kemet and ancient Africa for over 25 years now. Whenever I say that, it makes me feel old. But over 25 years, I've been studying this. And I actually obtained a degree from Cornell University and another degree from Metropolitan College of New York. So I've been studying this for quite some time. And also been teaching this information to our people for some time as well, since I've been actually doing tours in Kemet, in Egypt. We'll talk about the difference in a moment for those of you who aren't familiar. For the last 12 years, I've been taking annual tours of Africans to Kemet. I have been blessed enough to be responsible for now over 3,000 people of African descent returning to Africa to look for the echo of our ancient history. So that's an important milestone that we've just recently passed. We've also taken folks to other countries as well, so that we're even planning a large trip to Ethiopia for those of you who want to see antiquities in that area as well. In January, we'll be taking our trip to Ethiopia. I'm also the co-host and executive producer of a television show named Kemetic Legacy Today, which does air in Philadelphia for those of you who are here. But you can also find out much more about that online as well. And I'm also, one of the things that has occurred to me that I think is also very important. And let me take a step back and explain why it's important before I even tell you more about it. Often when people tell you the history, particularly of the land that they call Egypt, they give you history and they don't give you any spiritual, any religious context. And I'll tell you, Egypt, Kemet, did not occur in the same way that many societies occur today. It was not a secular society. Everything in Kemet was spiritual, and spirituality was everything. And so to omit spirituality from that discussion is to miss half the story. It does not make sense when you look at the history of a culture that was completely embedded with spirituality and even spiritual symbolism. And so it's critically important for you to understand that. And I've been practicing spirituality, Kemetic spirituality now for about 15 years. And in 2010, I was elevated to the level of priest. Some of our young people asked why I carry an ankh. We're going to talk more about the symbol, but you'll understand that's the reason why I carry an ankh, because I'm a priest and it's the symbol of my title. And so whenever I'm outside my home, you'll see me with my ankh. And so that's a thumbnail sketch. Usually my wife is here and she gives a much better introduction than I do. But I do want to tell you more about what we're going to be seeing today. The University of Pennsylvania has an incredible collection. It's not as large as the Metropolitan Museum. For some of you who have been on the Metropolitan Museum tour with me, I think I see at least 3 people who have been on the Metropolitan Museum tour. The Metropolitan Museum has many more artifacts than almost any museum in the United States. It's on par with the Louvre in France and the British Museum in London. But this museum has pieces that in some instances are older and better situated. So we get to see some things here that you won't see there. And I'm going to tell you there are 2 things here that are particularly special. One of them is a section of a palace. Usually our Kemetic ancestors created their palace out of things that actually could just simply decay, because they didn't think that palaces should be made of things that were eternal. We're going to talk about why that occurs in the Kemetic mindset in a little while. But we're lucky enough to have a large section of a royal palace in this museum. And also, by the way, on the palace, you might have seen this if you read the description. There's also a glyph there that is really, really quizzical. It's a glyph that some people say may have been a reference to an ancient light bulb. You're going to see that here today as well. Historians and archaeologists and linguists are not able to tell you what that glyph means. It's a very bizarre glyph. There's some who actually say that it might have been a reference to an ancient light bulb. You'll also see one of the largest Herumaket statues in the world. And you might say, what did he just say? What is a Herumaket statue? Is there anyone that's familiar with the term Herumaket? Someone want to tell us what that is? The Sphinx. Now, why didn't I use the word Sphinx?
Because it's a Greek term.
Because it's a Greek term. And so one of the things that we're going to do today is we're going to use as much of your ancient African language as we can. Why? Because we're talking about ancient Africa. It should be that simple. I shouldn't have to explain to you that I'm going to refrain from using many of the Greek terms. Now you're going to hear me mention the Greek terms because some of you are going to want to do additional research. And unfortunately, if you look up Herumaket, you're going to just see 3 or 4 people, myself included. That's not going to help you do much research. You're going to have to look up Sphinx, unfortunately. But we have to reclaim those names because our ancestors believed that the only way that they would continue to live is if you continued to say their names. If you continue to use the names of folks who conquered us in our latest phases, who are you giving power to? It's a really fundamental issue that has to be addressed here. And it doesn't mean that the people that created these exhibits didn't know those names. They chose not to use them. And so it's critically important for us to bring them back into existence. So we're going to do that. We're also going to go through virtually about 3,000 years of history in under 3 hours. It's going to be a very challenging thing to do, but I'm going to try to give you an understanding of what happened in the beginning, what happened in the middle, and what happened in the end. So that's another thing that we're going to do. Okay? Make sense? So there are really 3 tasks here. We go over them really quickly. We're going to give you a comprehensive sense of ancient Kemetic history, right? We're going to give you an understanding of a really, I guess, basic understanding of how the Kemetic language sounds and how it was used. And we're also going to give you a basic understanding of Kemetic spirituality. Those are the 3 things that we're going to do today. Is everybody up for that? Good. Now, I told you this is a participatory act, right? So I'm going to ask you questions. Feel free to ask me questions as well. Okay? Before we begin, let me ask one question. Who's been here before? That's good. That's excellent. Because I'll tell you, it's interesting that most people have not been to this museum even though they live in Philadelphia. I'd have to say it's probably one of the hidden gems of the city. And so we have to make sure that people in your communities, people that look like us, understand that they have a very important section of our history here on display. In addition to that, I'm going to say this and then we're going to move. There's also something special going on today where somewhere around 3 to 3:30, if we finish around then, we'll definitely, I'll try to walk with you to the area. You'll actually see people who are conserving Kemetic Sahu, Kemetic mummies. We're talking about the difference between the name Sahu and the difference between the name mummy. And that's a unique activity. You don't usually get to see it. I only see it when I go to Egypt. And so it's on display here today, and so you might want to actually take a look at what they do to ensure that these bodies of our ancestors are preserved. It's a very important task. Okay, any questions at the outset? Follow me. Okay, are we all here? Wonderful. Okay, I'm going to begin by greeting you in the words that your ancient Kemetic ancestors would have used. I'm going to say Hetepu. So say Hetepu. Hetepu. And it means something similar to blessings. Some of you may be more familiar with the term Hotep, right? Who's heard that? Now, of course, we know people in the cultural nationalist community have been using that term for a long time. Hetepu was it's rendered slightly differently, but it's essentially the same word. It's just a plural version of the same word. Okay? All right. Now, this is a really good place for us to start. And when you have the opportunity to come back for yourselves, and I really implore you that it's important for you to come back here on your own. I know that as I do tours at the Metropolitan Museum regularly, because I live in Manhattan, I go there regularly myself and just get lost. Why? Because it's not possible to obtain all the information, especially on a tour. I'm going to highlight some of the key pieces and give you a good thematic understanding, I hope, but definitely there's going to be things that you're going to figure out on your own. Pieces are going to speak to you, and that's why it's really important for you to come back on your own. So you're going to need to look at this guide that's behind me on your own as well. Now, what are we seeing here? You're actually seeing a description of the history of the land that has been misnomered Egypt. Now, once again, I don't want to use the word Egypt. Somebody rescue me so I don't have to use the word Egypt. What should I be calling it? Kemet is a wonderful rendition of it. It's generally written with the names KMT. And so we have to put vowels in order for us to be able to figure out how to actually vocalize the name of this wonderful land. Now, there's been great debate, I will tell you, over the meaning of that term. Some folks say that it means the black land, and they're saying that it means the black land because the soil that they needed to be able to remain in this land was black. It was a dark, fertile soil. And there are other folks that say, no, it actually means the black community, the black people. And they were making a contrast between themselves and some of the other people they had contact with. Now, I'm going to say to you, I'm not sure which is true, or if those are mutually exclusive. It's possible that it was used in both ways, because we know that the ancient Kemetic people describe themselves very differently than some of the other people in the land. But as you look at this scale behind me, this table behind me, you'll see that it starts all the way at about 5,500 BCE, before the Common Era. So how long ago was that?
2,000.
More than that? 7,000? Someone else want to give another answer?
8,000.
8,000, 10,000? What year are we in now?
12,000.
What year are we in now?
2015.
So what you would essentially do is add 2013 to 5,500. So we're talking about something that occurred over 7,000 years ago, over 7,500 years ago. Because essentially, the way that the timeline is created, according to historians, is we have the before the Common Era period, which used to be called before Christ. That's a whole other discussion that we don't have time for in this on this tour. But it goes all the way up to about 1 AD, which is approximately here. And that used to stand for Anno Domini, which means in the year of our Lord. Today, most people say CE, in the Common Era. Okay? So we're talking about something that really, we're talking about all of this history is 5,000 years before we even reach the year 1. Now, some of you would probably argue that the year 1 was a long time ago, right? Can you imagine if we were talking about 5,500 BCE? On this scale here, we're talking about the history of ancient Africa, but we really don't have much history from any other part in the world. There's almost nothing that we can look to at any other part in the world at this period in time. Now, we have some archaeological records, some excavations. We have, certainly you'll find fossils, right? There's a natural record of things in the world. But in terms of civilization, there's almost nothing at that time. What does that mean? It means that your ancestors were doing things like mathematics, writing great text, living in houses with multiple floors, long before people, and I know some people think this is hyperbole, but it is not. Long before some people had actually moved out of caves. This is not hyperbole. I'm not speaking so much that it's just flair. That's actually a fact. And so that's how long it goes. So in this period, we're talking about a period that's usually called the Barbarian, Amratrian, and Gurzian era. I don't want you to remember those names, but you should recognize that those are eras where they see civilization around particular periods. And then something very interesting happens at around 3200 BCE. Can someone tell me what happens in 3200 BCE with reference to Kemet? Very important date. In 3200 BCE, a king that was further into the interior of Africa, a king from this area here, this is sort of a map of Kemet, and so a king from this area around here gathers his army and moves northward to conquer some of the folks that were in control here. Does anyone know what his name was? No, this is before Djoser. Before Djoser. Namer. He has another name. Does anyone know another name for Namer?
Menes.
Menes. Right. And so that's another name for him. But this wonderful African, this wonderful black ruler creates one of the world's earliest civilizations. And he does it on a tablet that is usually called the Palette of Namer, which tells his story. This is the world's first historical document. Did you hear what I just said? Wow. The world's first historical document. And if you come with us to Kemet, you can see it with your own eyes. It'll take your breath away. It's amazing. And so he does this, and one of the things that this museum has that is incredible, and I want you to come closer from those of you who are over here for a second, and I want everyone to turn around for a moment. Does everyone see that white vessel in the middle of, you can come this way if you can't see it, in the middle of this case here? Does everyone see it? That vase was owned by this incredible African. Most museums have incredible exhibits of ancient Kemetic artifacts, but they do not have a piece that was owned by this man. That's an amazing thing that they have a piece, an artifact, that deals with Namer. So if you look at it closely, you'll actually see an image of a fish on the top. It's a fish that some of you like to eat at soul food restaurants. It's a catfish. And underneath it, you'll see a chisel. And so those two glyphs together make the sound Namer, and that is where we get the name of this wonderful king. Please say his name so he continues to live. Namer. He continues to do incredible work in the afterlife. And so from there, we move on into a period where you see the wonderful Heromakit statue. This is during the great, well, there's some dispute as to as a time period that it comes in. But most historians will argue that it occurs in the 4th dynasty. We don't have time to talk about why some folks say that it may be as much as 1500 or, I'm sorry, 10,000 years earlier. We don't have time to do that. That's another tour. But take a look at the breadth of history. Now, some of you are familiar with some names in Kemetic history, some rulers, right? Everyone's heard of the name Tutankhamun, right? He's so popular, Tutankhamun, King Tut, right? You would assume that he's so popular that he comes all the way at the beginning, right? Where do you think you would put him on this scale? Does anyone know? Which dynasty is he in?
New king.
19th, 18th, anyone else? 18th dynasty. Now what's a dynasty, first of all?
A dynasty.
Anybody want to describe what a dynasty is? I know you know the answer.
Every time they ruled.
It's a period of time, yes, but it refers to
The
something a little
time?
more basic than that.
So,
A dynasty is a group of rulers who are related in some way that rule in succession. And so, essentially, we're talking about families who are in control of a land. And so he comes from the 18th dynasty. That's quite late. He's here. This is a statue of him here. All of this occurred before him. The wonderful step pyramid, Step Merkut of Djoser. The building built by Imhotep, that great African genius, one of the world's first doctors. Much, much earlier. That is the first building in stone. How many of you live in a building that's built out of some sort of stone, out of brick or... Every single time you enter the door, you should knock on your doorway and give thanks to your African ancestor who gave that technology to the world. The world's first building in stone here, 3rd dynasty. Tutankhamun is all the way here, 18th dynasty. The great Merkuti, the great pyramids, 4th dynasty. And so then after the 18th dynasty, we proceed. We begin to have some rulers who are either of mixed parentage, who have come from different regions. And then finally we come to the period at around 332 BCE. What happens in 332 BCE? The Greeks come.
Macedonians.
That's right. It's better even call them Macedonians because in some ways the land of Greece didn't really exist when they came at one period in time. So the Macedonians come forward. And that man that is sometimes called Alexander the Great. That's a matter of perspective. I usually call him Alexander the Greek because that's more accurate to me. He comes forth and he is then in control of Kemet. And most people believe that sort of the history of Kemet is sort of over when we get to the Greco-Roman period, the time when the Greeks and the Romans are on the throne. And so we're talking about 5,000 years of history. Are you ready to talk about more about 5,000 years of history? Yeah. Let's look at some of the artifacts so you get a sense of what we're talking about here. Now, you saw this wonderful vessel from Namur. An incredible, incredible vessel. Right?
Yes.
That's one of the most important pieces in this museum. But you'll also take note of the fact that here, behind this brother here, you'll see a stone vase by a brother whose name was King Khâsekhemoui. Say Khâsekhemoui with me. Khâsekhemoui. Important ruler that comes in what is usually called the early dynastic period. So he's in the 2nd dynasty. Very early period in Kemetic history. And he has a very prosperous reign. And he's known for doing one other thing of great note in history. Does anyone know what, when you think of Khâsekhemoui, what you should think of? Young people, you should really remember this name. If you want to tell something incredible to your teacher on Monday, trust me, this will be one of them. Khâsekhemoui is known for creating the world's first standing navy. When the word navy comes to mind, do you see people that look like you and I in charge of them? The world's first standing navy is put together by this brother by the name of Khâsekhemoui. Say his name with me, please, once again. We have to say his name in order for him to live. And so that's something that you definitely would like to tell your teachers on Monday, students, that someone from the 2nd dynasty in Egypt, in Kemet, built the world's first navy. I want you to take a look at this structure here, on this side here really quickly. And I want to now give you a sense of how names were written in ancient Kemet. Does anyone know what that item that is carved into this stone is called? Someone has an answer. What is that item that's carved into this stone called? It's certainly hieroglyphs. Now hieroglyphs is once again also a Greek name. What would be the African name? There's a bird on it, yes. You're absolutely right, there's a bird on it. But I'm talking about something even more. The Meadowneture. That's the name for hieroglyphs. The sacred writings. But what you're seeing is an early version of something that you're much more familiar with. We usually see an oval structure with this, and a name is written in it. And most of us go and visit Africa, we go to Kemet, modern day Egypt, and we bring them back for our family and friends. So I got you a, ooh, we have some people who are studying here. Who said Shen? You know we have some people who are studying here, right? Now, most people wouldn't say Shen. What would they say?
Cartouche.
They'd say cartouche. Now, some of you think that that's an ancient African term.
French.
Did you know that that name actually comes? Brother Kaka here is saying, he says a French word. How does a French word get to be used in ancient Africa when the country of France doesn't even exist when this was created? Someone tell me, do you know how that happened?
Their architect.
Partially, when Napoleon goes to Kemet, he brings a number, not only does he bring soldiers, because he seeks to conquer the land, but he brings a number of scholars and historians and all sorts of folks who are looking to obtain information about this great ancient society with him. And when they look at the way these names are written, they say, oh wow, that oval thing that we're looking at looks a lot like the thing that we hold our bullets in. And they were speaking French, so they didn't say cartridge like we would say in English, they said cartouche. And so essentially what you're doing is you're equating an incredibly important spiritual symbol that encloses the name of your ancestors, a symbol that means eternity. You're equating that with a symbol of death and destruction. And then you're wondering why they're not intervening in our lives today. Maybe it's because you told them they cease to exist. And so it's critically important for us to discard that word cartouche. Now I know that you're going to have family and friends that are going to say it. Give them the correct term. And then sister, tell us that name again. A Shen. It means eternity. This is an early version of a Shen called the Sarek. Say Sarek with me. This one's rectangular. And inside there, on the bottom, you'll see that it has something, it's an interesting fluted, you'll see that there are kind of stripes on the bottom there. That is a reference to the sacred palace that the ruler would live in. And so he's essentially saying, and let me scoot over here for 1 second. So this is where he lived. This means I'm the king or queen. This is me. And this is an image of the divine on earth, who's been sometimes called by what name? The falcon has been called by what name in Kemet? Heru. We have some people that are doing a lot of work. Heru is not the name that I get on these tours. This is the 201 tour. What's the Greek name that we usually hear? Horus. Horus. Now, once again, let's use the words that come from ancient Africa because we're talking about ancient Africa, right? Okay, so Heru would be the name for this deity. So in some ways what he's saying is I'm the most powerful person on the planet. I'm the baddest brother around, and I'm only able to be this person because I'm focused on the divine. So this symbol is a very important symbol, and you'll even see that in some ways you might see the beginnings of the more oval structure that we're familiar with if you look at the entire structure. And this one comes from a king by the name of Ka'a. Say Ka'a with me. Ka'a. Another important ancient ruler. We're going to go behind this structure here and talk a little bit further about ancient Kemet. And also not interrupt all the folks that are in the museum that aren't on our tour. Now someone tell me, what do you think you're seeing here? What is this?
Ancient hieroglyphs.
Ancient hieroglyphs, yes. And you learned a new term other than hieroglyphs. You remember what the new term was? Say Medu, Netter, or Netcher. You can say either one. Okay? So that's what you're seeing. But what else are you seeing? Does anyone else want to take a stab at what else they may be seeing? What is this? Yes. But I'm asking, what does it come from? What is it? I mean, was this in someone's kitchen or their living room, or what is this? In a tomb. So there's some folks, sometimes when I talk to people about what I do, that say that they're incredible replicas of things in these museums. I look at them and say, yeah, there's some incredible replicas, but most of the pieces you're seeing are actually the ancient pieces. I had a long debate with a man who was actually born in Egypt that debated me for such a long time, and I was sitting there kind of looking around like, this must be bizarro, and I cannot believe that he's actually arguing that these pieces are not the originals. You know, so I actually convinced him to come with me to the museum, and he started to cry. He said, I can't believe they have my heritage. And we had another long conversation. He cried a little bit deeper. I was like, well, you know, your people got there much more recently, so I don't know if it's your heritage. So he had another deeper cry. But clearly I want you to take a look at this and recognize that these actually come from a tomb. A tomb of a man by the name of Kaipure. Say Kaipure for me. Now keep in mind that once again we're going to continue to say these words because I want you to become more familiar with how it sounds. That's the first step in trying to obtain some mastery of the language, to become familiar with how it sounds. Now, as we look at this amazing structure, you're going to recognize that this was from the section that was called the chapel area. I'm going to talk to you about why it's called the chapel area in a moment. But if we're talking about this man by the name of Kaipure, where do you think he is? As you look at all these pieces, what do you think is, where is he? Is he reflected here? Sister, what you saying?
I think he's there.
Now, what makes you think that that must be him there?
He is larger than everyone else, and he appears to be the center of all the activity. But mainly it's his size, I think, and how well defined his face is.
And you know, I didn't eat breakfast or lunch, so this sister is going to continue the tour. So I'm going to say that is an incredible answer. Give her a hand. Folks, I want you to interact with the pieces yourselves so that you're able to come to any museum in the world and begin to obtain the information so you can continue to talk to our people about it. For every person here, there are 400 or 500 that have never even stepped foot in any museum to see anything that relates them to their ancient people. So you're going to have to continue to tell this story. Don't just tell them you should go talk to Brother Jabari. You've now all been deputized. Okay? Now take a look at this brother here. She's absolutely correct. That if you look at the way that he's depicted, he's larger than anyone else, and there's a level of definition that's been given to him. So it gives you a sense that he is the most important person in this description. Now, what are the other people doing essentially? If you look at these brothers here along here, they're walking, but what are they doing as they walk?
Carrying things.
Carrying food,
Tools.
tools. Okay, let's see. I'm going to put someone on the spot. Who wants to play the game? That's who that is. You do? Come forward, young man. Let's ask you a question. I want you to look at all of these people here, and first of all, I want you to look at their hair. Does it look like something familiar to you? Have you seen it? Oh, what did you say it looked like?
Black hair.
Now see, how old are you again? He's 8 years old. Now I guarantee you that's what he sees now, but if we're not careful, by the time he's my age, he's gonna be saying something a little different. Because it's absolutely obvious what we're looking at. But throughout the years, you're going to continue to hear that. You're going to hear, first of all, they're all wearing wigs. And yes, some of them were wearing wigs, but I'm sorry, I don't see too many folks of other ethnicities wearing the hair of, well, maybe we do know one group that does it. But we don't see too many groups that do that go around every day with something that looks like something that's not how they look. I mean, that doesn't usually happen. Right? So yeah, some of them are wearing wigs, but there's nothing that says that everyone's wearing a wig. Right?
Right.
In addition to that, and sometimes I say that to historians too, they're wearing wigs. I go, well, how can you prove that everyone in those things is wearing wigs? Well, not everyone's wearing one. Well, how do you know? How do you speak with such definitiveness at something that is clearly not definitive? So anyway, I'm very glad that he said that. I also want you to do one more thing. I want you to take a look at some of the things that they're carrying and tell us one thing that you see. How about we look at this second row here? Do you recognize anything? Keep walking down.
A plane.
You see, say again?
A plane.
A crane? A crane. That's a very, very precise word for a bird. He said he sees a crane. He didn't say a bird. This 8-year-old said crane. Who are his parents here? You're doing something with this young man, right? That's a very precise definition. He saw the long neck and said it looks like a crane. But I want you to look at the men underneath him. Do you see that they're carrying things? Do you recognize anything that they're carrying? Can you describe any of the food that you see? Someone want to help him? You could be an older student or a younger student. You could be an adult. You could be you're coming. Step forward. Come on, step forward and give him a hand. Do you recognize any of the foods?
They're carrying fish.
You see fish, birds. What else? Fruits. Any specific fruits? Any specific vegetables? Pears. Corn. I don't know if you see corn.
Papayas or something.
What are you talking about here?
This looks like papaya.
It could be a papaya, right?
Yeah.
Right. Or even a mango looks long.
And then bananas.
I'm gonna tell you, Egypt has
I
some
see
of the
both
sweetest
bananas.
mangoes you'll ever eat.
Bananas.
And I say that as an offspring of someone who's from Guyana, so I'm telling you. My mother still disagrees, so I'm like, you haven't been there, so I have to.
Bananas.
Okay, that's actually not bananas. You know what that is? That's actually a form of lettuce. And that form of lettuce is very similar to romaine lettuce. Now, why am I being so specific? Now, this is actually something that I'm going to say, and the adults will be able to understand something a bit deeper than the students will. But recognize that some of these things that they're carrying, there's nothing here that's carried just because they thought it looked great. Everything has meaning. And some of it has to do with the fact that he had actually passed on, he had died, and they expected him to do what? To come back. And so in doing that, this has to do with birth. And one of the things that has to happen before anyone is born is what? Adults? Intercourse, right? Does intercourse have to happen before you're reborn? Right? Okay. So some of these items actually deal with sexuality. And I'm being very specific, particularly to our brothers, it was believed that lettuce, that type of lettuce, actually was nourishing to men. And the closest thing that we have in the United States to it is romaine lettuce, just so you know. Just so you know. Just so you know. And so, why are they carrying these foods? What's the point of this?
Tribute?
Feast.
Tribute, yes.
Feast.
Yes, but that might be a little too academic. I want you to give me a more basic reason why. A feast, okay, but feast for who?
For the king.
Why?
When it comes back.
When he comes back.
More than when he comes back.
So that he's nourished while he's...
So he's nourished before he makes the return visit, right? And so you're seeing sacred symbolism here. They're giving him nourishment so that he can make the great journey from the land of the living to the land of the afterlife. And this section here is called the chapel because it's a section that family and friends would have been able to come in. Someone's phone or... It's a section that you'd be able to come in and actually share a meal with your ancestor or your friend. And so sometimes when they open these, they would find desiccated fruits and vegetables on the floor because someone came in and had a meal with them and left.
Would that be considered funerary rite?
Absolutely. The question was would that be considered a funerary rite? Yes, it is. And you know, we do similar things actually in our traditions. I remember when I was a very young, I must have been about 4, my mother took me to Guyana, and we went to see one of my aunts, and we had this wonderful meal. I mean, the food was really good. And my aunt didn't have much, as many of us didn't, but she really knew how to perform miracles in the kitchen. And I had some food, and I said, this plate is really too small. And I looked at the front of the table, and I saw there was a plate that nobody was eating from. And so I was 4, so what did I go do? I said, I want that chicken. Why do I have this small piece when the big piece of chicken is on there? So I went to pick up the big piece of chicken. It was a gasp in the room. I was like, what did I do? Unfortunately, no one really told me what I was doing, but what do you think they were doing?
Stopping you
Well, the
from.
place was set.
Who was it set for? Someone who had passed on. My uncle had passed just to 2 years before. And my aunt, whenever she had these gatherings, because he was the one that called the gatherings usually, she would leave a plate for him. Now they would eat it after the whole celebration was over. They didn't just throw it away. But he was there with us. That same concept is here. So recognize that we also don't want to give you a historical portrait, but an intimate portrait. So you recognize that these people are really no dissimilar from you. And the incredible things that they accomplished are things that you can also accomplish. Now I want you to take a look at this piece here for a quick moment, then we're going to move. Now, I'd like someone in the front to read to me what historians usually call this item. It's called a false door stela. Anybody have an idea of what that means?
Is it false?
False door stela. You know that sometimes if you've watched these Hollywood depictions of ancient
Siri
Kemet,
not available.
you'll see
Connect
all
to
of
the
these
internet.
booby traps and, people coming to life and mummies. It's one of the most disrespectful depictions that you can imagine. When you actually understand that these are your ancestors, that they were doing these things because they were actually focused on the process of becoming a divine being, the process of afterlife, of living after. When we see these depictions, it's actually really disrespectful when you actually think of it in that sense. But one of the reasons why people think that they're booby traps and all these other things in these tombs is because of this structure here that they call the false door. Now, unfortunately, Western historians, sometimes describe things so literally that it take all of the spiritual meaning out of it. Do you think anyone can walk through that?
No.
So obviously you know that it's a false door in that sense, right? That name tells us nothing whatsoever. Why would they put a door that you couldn't walk to in a tomb? Who's supposed to walk through it?
The car.
The Ka. Now tell us about the word Ka. You want me to tell? Okay, all right, because he's filming. Essentially, what you need to understand here is the Ka was one of the forms of the Kemetic soul. The Kemetic people were so focused on the afterlife that they had different forms of the soul. You know, we always just say your spirit, your soul. They had at least 5 major forms. You know, they say sometimes that the Eskimo people are so familiar with snow that they have like 20 names for snow. Can you imagine being so focused on the afterlife that you have 5 different names for the spirit? That's really what you're seeing. They're so focused on the process of entering into the Holy Land that they had to have a higher level, a higher degree of distinguishment than we do today. But this door was actually for the person who had passed on. So they could come and go, so they could be part of the land of the living and return to the land of the afterlife. Because we truly believe that we wanted our ancestors to be part of our living experience. We did not believe that we should be afraid of them. That's a Western concept. You know how everyone celebrates Halloween? I don't know if you know that celebration came about because there was the belief that in particularly the Roman Catholic calendar, that there was a day, Hallows Eve. All Hallows Eve is what it used to come from. The next day was a day when they believed that spirits would return. And so those people in those areas said, well, we don't want them to come back. They're dead. So they would dress in disguises so that they wouldn't be able to find their homes. Can you imagine that?
Very superstitious.
How many of you have had grandparents that have passed on? Wouldn't you love to be able to talk to them today? That's the concept that comes to you from ancient Africa, that our ancestors are still involved in our lives today. And so I would not call this a false door. It should be called a spirit door, so that you get a sense of what of an understanding of what it truly meant to us. Now I know that, is there one person that's in our Medunetter class? I know someone registered. I don't see her though. We're actually conducting a Medunetter class right now. And so I was going to ask her to read. She's probably lucky that she's not here because I was going to put her on the spot. But one of the things that you'll know is that this is probably one of the easiest things for you to read when you're beginning to learn, because it always starts with Hetep Di Nesu. So when you do your reading, you hear about a Hetep Dinasu, you should recognize that. Remember we always say Hotep or Hertep to each other? That symbol right here, this flat symbol with something that looks almost like an egg on top of it, it's actually a piece of bread on top of it. That is the word for Hotep or Hetep. So now when you see it, you know how it looks.
Which one is that again?
This one right here. See this flat rectangular thing with something right on top of it? That's the symbol for Hetep. And then D is this pyramid-looking structure, this Merkut-looking structure. And so essentially, an offering that the king gave to me for me to pass on. That's what it means. And so there's a formula here, a description, a formula of this person, what they did and what the king gave to them and what they did in their life that's on here. So recognize that as you begin to delve deeper and begin to read the words of your ancestors for yourself, this is an excellent way to do it. Let's move on. A bit more about Kemetic spirituality and some of the most important artifacts that you'll see. Does anyone see this piece here behind me? It looks almost like a boomerang. Does anyone know what that was used for?
Hunting?
Not quite, but it's a good answer.
Birthing.
Well,
Birthing?
Birthing. Talk to us about that.
I saw one of your videos. That's weird.
Oh, did you?
Kind of cheating. Yeah.
No, but that's not cheating. You mean you did some
Yeah.
research is what you're saying.
Yeah. You have one of your videos where it
Yeah.
talks about.
Now, amazed, I don't even remember which video that is. I now have to remember what video I said that in. But this is actually used for birthing. You're absolutely correct. And I would say, as you probably heard me say, that this is probably one of the most important artifacts in the entire museum. Many of these artifacts, as beautiful as they are, they were created for tombs. And so this incredibly talented, this magnificent artisan would create these statues and then stick it in a tomb, and they believed that no living eyes would ever see it again. Can you imagine that kind of concept, that you would create something in perfection that someone would never be able to see again? I mean, there's just a level of excellence in the ideology of a society that develops things like that I think we need to return to today. You know, in the day where, good enough is okay. Right. Or, let's just sweep it under the rug. Who's going to look under the rug? That's not how your ancestors did things. They did things in perfection because they believed that the world existed in perfection. And if you created things in perfection, they could last into eternity like the world did. This is a concept, one of the fundamental principles of mine that this brother is wearing on his hat right there. Don't fall asleep.
Who, me?
Yeah, because
if
you do, that hat's going to be gone. You know what I mean? Like, Brother Jordan, you see my hat? Oh, no. It's a wonderful hat that he's wearing. That's kind of the principle of mine, that you should do things in excellence. Now, he rightly described this as something that would be used for birthing. We don't even know what they're called anymore. We've lost the name. But essentially, these magnificent pieces would have been wielded by a priest or priestess, and during the process that a woman was trying to give birth, they would have said hekau, say hekau with me, words of power. Sometimes that's unfortunately rendered spells or magic, and I don't think that that's fair. They're words of power, right? We say affirmations. Why can't they say affirmations? They have to fetishize ancient African traditions. But anyway, so they use this wonderful wand, and they would draw a protective circle around the bed of the woman. Because in those days, giving birth was a very dangerous act. In the ancient world, when most women died, they died in childbirth. And many children, childbirth rates are still, the death of women during childbirth is still much higher than it should be for an advanced society. But in the ancient world, it was a very high percentage. And so they recognized that they had to assist these women with spiritual words. Now, does it mean that all they did was spiritual words? No, because some of the most advanced sciences around gynecology comes to us from Kemet. So early that we have inscriptions from other ancient cultures later in Kemetic history, where they actually have someone that's very ill, and they say, we need to send them to Kemet because we have no idea how to heal them. And so you'd actually see letters written from kings to another king saying, I know we're in good standing. There's one great letter, a king says, well, my sisters wanted to have children. and she's not been able to do so. So I'd love to be able to, because we're friends, to send her there so your doctors can work with her. Unfortunately, the Kemetic doctor says your sister is probably about 55 years old. I don't know if that's going to happen, but we'll work with her. And so that gives you a sense of how advanced the science of medicine was in Kemet. So whenever you see this piece, understand that you're seeing the nexus, the connection between science and spirituality, which our Kemetic ancestors used with great skill. With great skill. Let's move on. Some folks can come around this way a little bit too before we begin to speak so that you're able to all fit in. Now, one of the things I have not been doing very well thus far is I haven't really been giving you a sense of the periods that we're talking about. Most of the pieces that we saw at the very beginning were from either what's called the Archaic period. That's the period usually in the first two dynasties. Dynasty 0, which is when that great king comes forth and creates Kemet. And then Dynasty 1, when his offspring continue the story, into Dynasty 2, where they first say this is sort of the beginning of what is generally called the Old Kingdom. Now, why do they talk about the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, and the New Kingdom? Particularly because historians have a really difficult time trying to talk about literally 5,000 years, at least 3,000 years of dynastic history. They have a very difficult time of talking about it without trying to describe a period in a way that someone can easily rediscover. And so what historians did, now ancient people didn't do this. What the historians did is they looked at this period of time and they said, well, let's break it up into three big sections. The Old Kingdom is generally when we begin to see the classical period of Kemetic statuary, of Kemetic architecture. It's when the great Merkuti are built. What's the word for Merkuti? The non-African word that you're familiar with. The pyramid. Now, why am I not using the word pyramid?
A Greek rice cracker was a pyramid.
Come forth and you gotta, come on. You know you're a ringer too, right? Say it nice and loud. What is it?
The Greeks saw them and they said it reminds us of something that would be the equivalent of a rice cracker in their culture, a permisi or something.
They had a small cake that they would put on the fire. And they looked at these magnificent structures, which, by the way, still cannot be duplicated in 2013. And they said, that looks like a little rice cake that we eat. Folks, if you want to call one of your greatest architectural achievements by the name of a little rice cake, you get a refund. There's nothing I can do. There's nothing I can do to help you. We have to recognize what we did in excellence and call them by names of excellence. So we give reverence to the things that we did so that we begin to understand that we can continue to do them, right? Isn't that what you want to do? So if you give reverence to it, then you can say, well, how can we become our ancestors? If you continue to say that you're going to try to do something with a rice cake, I don't know, go to the supermarket, but don't try to engage in higher mathematics, okay? Because you're in a different category. So essentially, the Old Kingdom is where we see the highest period of Kemetic architecture, right?
That term again for the correct term.
Merkuti is the word I use. Often, if you do research, you'll see the word Mer. I use the word Merkut because Kut is sort of the house of the golden soul. That's really how it can be described. Okay. It's one of the names of the spirit. So I say that it's... say again? That's a whole other conversation. The Merkaba is a little bit different. It's a little different. It's not. You're not talking about the structure when you say Merkaba.
The two pyramids together to create the Merkaba.
You're talking about what some people call the Star of David.
Yeah.
There are a number of scholars that are beginning to recognize that many of the symbols that we see in the Abrahamic traditions, that is Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, come directly from Kemet. It's a very controversial topic. Very controversial topic. And as you talk to people long enough, when people who are interested in, for example, my spirituality, talk to me about ancient Kemetic. Do you want to come through or? Talk to us about ancient Kemetic spirituality. What sometimes they say is, they listen for a while and they say, that's really similar to Christianity. It's funny how things are similar all around the world. And then I say something to them that means that sometimes they're not friendly with me anymore. And I say, well, yes, they're very similar because one created the other. And then they go, what do you mean? One person, I was talking to a really nice lady who reminded me of my grandmother one day. And we had this long conversation at a rest stop. I'd stopped there, we were on a long trip. We had this long conversation because she saw my aunt, and we had such a wonderful conversation. Then when I said that, she said, Martha, he said Jesus ain't real. I said, oh, no, maybe I should get out of here because I don't know if I'm gonna make it back home. So it can be a very difficult conversation that these symbols have their origins in ancient Kemet. I don't believe that that symbol was ever called the Merkaba, but you should recognize that those symbols fundamentally have their origin in Kemet. Fundamentally. And if you actually listen to some of the most learned scholars in each of those three different traditions, they'll actually admit it. You can't speak to the regular folks because they just don't know. All they read is the Bible, the Torah, the Quran. They don't know anything about the history. Nothing. All they read is the book. And they think the book is the history. Right? So that's the challenge you're going to have. Now, I know that was a long tangent. Let's get back to what I was saying, really quickly.
House of the Golden Soul.
Yes, the House of the Golden Soul. So the Mirkut is the House of the Golden Soul. And that is why I use the word Mirkut. The one that you'll see when you do research is mostly Mer. Then you go to the Middle Kingdom where we see the classical period for literature. Right? This is where we see some of the wonderful works come forth in the Middle Kingdom. And then we have the New Kingdom where we begin to see Kemet as an empire. Kemet in control of a swath of land where it's believed that they may have reached Germany. Did you hear what I just said? I know you didn't hear what I just said.
Yes, a lot of the archaeologists came out.
Amazingly, the Kemetic Empire was really one of the largest empires ever to exist. Now, one of the reasons why they didn't see it that way is because Kemetic people always wanted to die on Kemetic soil. So for the most part, there are some exceptions, they always came back home. And so they'll find pieces and they'll say, this piece has been here for thousands of years, why? And it's because obviously they were there and those people were giving tribute to them because they were part of their empire. So that happened. Now if we had decided we were going to live someplace else, then we would know this story already. So essentially those are the three large sections. We were mostly talking about the Old Kingdom when we went through the other pieces we saw. Now let's talk, we're going to skip the Middle Kingdom because this museum doesn't have as many pieces from the Middle Kingdom period. Let's talk about the New Kingdom. One of the most important dynasties in the New Kingdom is the 18th dynasty. It's the dynasty where all of the rulers that you're familiar with come from. Tutankhamun, King Tut comes from there. Some of you may know Akhenaten, he comes from there. It's an incredible period, but we don't usually know how it happened. In brief, and this I could tell this story for an hour. I'm going to tell it to you in 30 seconds. Essentially what happened is a group of people were welcomed into Kemet because they had a great famine in their land. They came in, and just in a few generations later, they were in control. And they were really brutal rulers and arrogant rulers. Generally, people call them either the Hexhasu or the Hyksos. The Hyksos is the name you're going to see most often. She's doing some work over here. She's answering almost everything. The Hyksos.
Were they the first?
Were they?
The first invaders or the first?
Probably not, but they were the invaders that stayed for a long period in an earlier period.
They were the first thorn.
Certainly not. In a long period of time, there are other people that come in at different times, right? But they're probably the earliest group of foreign people that stays for an extended period. They're in control for almost 200 years. Some people argue that the Hyksos are the ancestors of the people that we consider the first Jewish people or the first Arabic people. Now I'm going to blow your mind and say they probably were both. Because we're talking to some degree about some of the first peoples that come from that area. And so they're in control of Kemet for some time. A great family says, we need to get Kemet back. They're from Kemet. They say, we need we need to get these foreign people off the throne. One king decides he's going to ride off on his horse and do so against the wishes of his war council, and he is immediately killed. His eldest son comes to fight, he's killed. And at that time, the only person that's left to get on the throne is a child. And so instead of him being in control of the whole empire, his mother serves as his regent. And so they go to the mother and they said, look, you lost your husband, you lost your son. Maybe it's time for us to let the Hyksos be in control and just enjoy the little bit of control you have in this small area here. You're more like a mayor than a king, really. And she says, no, I'm going to lead the army. And she gets on her horse with her axe and fights. Incredible story that I'm sure most of you have never heard. Does anyone know her name?
Almost Nefertari.
No, she's her mother.
That's her.
But the
Nope.
story,
Ahotep is her name.
that whole
Ahotep
story,
is her name, yes.
The whole story is the reminder of the Old Testament. Those same scenes are depicted in the Old Testament, even down to the child.
Some of them.
Yeah.
Some of them.
Yeah, down
Now
to
the funny thing is that some people might say that the Jews were the ones that were in control.
No, it wasn't.
Well, according to the archaeological record, now see, she's having some trouble with this. According to the archaeological record, there's a mythological record, and that's important. The mythological story is important. But when we're talking about history, we have to be clear what happened in history. And we have multiple sources that give us the story of the Hyksos and their time in Kemet. It is believed that they may be the people that become the Jews later. Why? Because when they finally are defeated and they escape, where do they go to? They go to Canaan. And the Kemetic ruler follows them to destroy their village. A place they called Shach Ruhin. So, anyway. Her name is Ahotep, Queen Ahotep. It's spelled A-A-H-O-T-E-P. Very important queen.
That wouldn't be
when we'll spell
plagiarism?
now. What would be
Their
plagiarism?
story. Would that be considered plagiarism?
I don't think so. I think one is occurring in myth.
Okay,
I'm going to tell you honestly, the people that wrote that, I don't think they thought they were writing history.
okay.
They were writing myth.
I agree.
Yeah, so if they thought they were writing a story that actually happened, then it would be plagiarism. I know those are difficult topics that I went over very quickly. If you want to beat me up, you can beat me up later. But Jabari is going to look like a great king, the King Tutankhamun that you're familiar with. But this is also a piece that comes from him, from King Tutankhamun, back here as well. King Tut, the one that you're most familiar with the golden burial mask. His father, Akhenaten, decides that what he's going to do, you're going to see some pieces from Akhenaten in here. He decided, I think what he decided to do was he said, well, Kemet is a very cosmopolitan place now. There are people from all over that are here. So what should I do? I think he decided that he was going to try to make Kemetic spirituality very basic so that everyone would be able to partake in it. Some people say he's the world's first monotheist. I would disagree with them wholeheartedly because we see whole monotheism or the concept of monotheism in the earliest time in Kemet. He simplifies things. You can argue that when he says that he's going to only deal with the form of the divine that is called the Aten. Someone whispered it back there. Why y'all whispering back there? Come on now. The Aten, or more appropriately, the Aten Ra. His son then decides after his death that he's going to take things back to the old form of Kemetic spirituality. And that's the reason why you see him depicted here as a moon. Okay? That's why he looks this way. It's a very interesting concept. Now, as we move in here, you're going to see pieces that relate to this family. And I honestly say to you that I just said that Akhenaten is the father, right? But you should also recognize that there are some people who still argue that he was his brother, but most historians today say that he was his father. Okay? Now there's small pieces in here that I can talk about, but they're so small for a group, let's just go in here. If you're going to come back, by the way, by yourself, take a look at the pieces in that. I find those to be very interesting where they talk about the creation of amulets. I think that that's a very interesting piece for you to come and see. You'll see here a large silk screen version of Akhenaten. You see it here? Does anyone know what his name was when he first came to the throne? It wasn't Akhenaten. He was at first Amenhotep IV. And then when he decides he's going to change Kemetic spirituality, he becomes Akhenaten. And so that's what you're seeing. You're seeing an image of Akhenaten. Some people call him the heretic king. Why? He was quite controversial for what he does. Quite controversial for what he does to Kemetic spirituality. Okay? Let's move a little further in. I think we'll stand here for a second. Now, because what he did was so controversial, extremely controversial, because Akhenaten in what he does is so controversial, after he dies and the spiritual form is reverted to its ancient form, something curious happens. They actually decide that they're going to go to his, the temple that he created, and they're going to destroy it and reuse the blocks. And that's the reason why, if you note, all the pieces that depict him are actually fragmentary. Do you notice that? Look at the pieces you're looking at. They're small pieces. This is pretty much one of the largest pieces that you'll see from this period behind you, with him depicted as receiving the sun from Aten, receiving power from Aten. Now you might say, well, what is Aten? Does anyone want to tell me what they think Aten must be? The sun? Anyone? A particular, certainly God. Yeah, absolutely.
The hidden one.
Say again?
The hidden one.
The hidden one. Tell us why you said the hidden one. Aten is actually not the hidden one.
Okay.
Amun is the hidden one.
Okay.
Right? But you're on the right path. It was an important. Now, why did she help me do what I was trying to do? Because all of this is actually a description. The Kemetic people believed that the sun was the best description of the divine force. None of us could live without the sun. It shines on all people indiscriminately. It's a way for you to look at the divine force. It's symbolism.
Manifestation.
It's a manifestation, right? And so they believed, certainly not polytheism, I think. In some of the descriptions you'll read, it even says that there's one divine force that is not named. Mm-hmm. Why? Because the divine force is everything. How do you name something that is everything? What name do you give it if it's everything? A name distinguishes something from something else, right?
Right.
I'm Jabari because I'm not Malik, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's the reason why that wasn't named. They named the way that the divine force operated in particular situations. And so that is what occurs. Now, Aten is supposed to be the power of the sun at its highest point in the sky. And that's the reason why you'll see it depicted this way. And even in this depiction, you'll see it depicted there this way. Now, when the sun was the young son and just being born, does anyone know what the youngest son was called? Anybody? Khepera. I know you know the answers. He's filming. He's filming. That's the reason why he's like, I'm not trying to mess up my tape. I know the answers. But essentially, Khepera is the symbol of the sun being born. Wow. Now, if the sun is the most powerful thing in the universe, how could the sun be born? And who is the sun's mother? You mean even the sun has a mother? How is that possible? Anyone want to talk to me about the sun's mother? Does anyone know who the sun's mother is? A form. Some people would say she's a form. Usually we would say that the lady of the heavens is called Nut.
Oh, no.
And you'll see her a lady. She's a lady that is bent over with stars on her body. She is the heavens. Your African women are the heavens. She is so powerful, so bad that she swallows the sun at night and gives birth to it in the morning. So in the morning, Khepera emerges. In the middle of the day, it becomes Aten-Ra. At the end of the day, it is Amun-Ra. So that is the description. Now, these are symbolic, once again. Amun-Ra is sort of the sun that's hidden, the sun that is in its completion. Khepera is a symbol of transformation, the power of coming forth from a place of ignorance, possibly into a place of, this is how the symbolism is used sometimes, into a place of enlightenment, symbol of rebirth. Does anybody know what Khepera is usually, how is it usually depicted? There's a symbol for it. It's a scarab beetle. Now, why didn't I use the word scarab? It's Greek again. Okay? So recognize that the word Keper or Khepera is the word for scarab. Okay? Now, does anyone know who Akhenaten was married to? You know his wife.
Nefertiti.
Nefertari is an earl. Well, there's several queens that are named Nefertari, and actually several people named Nefertiti as well. But Nefertari is usually an older queen. In fact, you remember that warrior queen that rode her horse to defeat the Hyksos? Her daughter's name was Amos Nefertari. She's a very important queen. We don't have time to talk about her here, but if you're going to do additional research, please look for this incredible sister, who was always depicted with the blackest possible skin. It's not even humanly possible the way they depict her. That's Queen Amos Nefertari. Now, Queen T actually is the mother. You have two incredible rulers, Amenhotep III. Say Amenhotep III with me. It means Amen, or this form of the divine, is pleased with my birth. What a powerful, powerful name to give oneself. And so we have King Amenhotep III, right, who comes forth and builds in really large fashion. And then we have his wife, whose name was Queen T. Queen T is also depicted as a woman that is clearly, as clearly African as anyone that you'll possibly see. There's no way that you can dispute who this great lady is. And so I hope that you'll do additional research on these people, because these are your ancestors. You need to know who they are, what they did, because that's going to tell you what we must do. There's no way to understand ourselves without, I don't even think I have the video I wanted to show you, without understanding what these great rulers did. They give birth to Akhenaten, the heretic king, and he takes as his wife a lady by the name of Nefertiti. Does anyone know what the word Nfer or Nefer means? Not life. Beautiful, beautiful. And Titi almost means like extremely in some ways. So she's the lady that's extremely beautiful. Now they always show you this image, but I'll tell you honestly, that image is probably not the appropriate image of Nefertiti, of Queen Nefertiti. Let me show you a really quick video that the Discovery Channel did. This gives you an idea of, they looked at her, they have her Sa, her mummy is not an ancient Kemetic word. Her Sa, they have her Sa, or her Wa, those are both names for mummy, and they actually did what they call forensic work on her. They recreated how she would have looked based on her skull. Now I'll tell you, the Discovery Channel made this incredible video, but ask them to give you a copy of it, and you'll still be waiting. I had to actually download this from another website for you to take a look at it. Come on. Play. I'm having technical difficulties here. Okay, I'm not going to be able to do what I wanted to do. I really wanted to show you that video. Let's see if I can at least show you a picture of the video. Let's see, give us a second here. Just when you want to actually something to work perfectly is when it will not. Okay. If I'm able to pull it up later, I will. But essentially recognize that this is the image that they created.
Wow.
Their argument is that this is what she would have looked like. Using forensic sciences, they came up with this image. And I'll tell you, it looks very close to all the images that you'll see of her, except that one.
Yes, please.
Except that one. There's another lecture that I've done that describes the process of misrepresenting who she was. Can you believe this? I put the laptop in sleep and the video is playing by itself. And we're not going to struggle with it today. I'm going to just show you the image again. Here we go. That's an image of her. And guys, if you want a copy of it, email me. Jabari will send you the image so you can show it to your family and friends. Okay, but that unfortunately is the one that you'll see of the bust that's actually in Germany. Scholars now, a large number of scholars now are probably saying that that's actually a fraud. And it's actually that one there, the one that's in the Alts Museum in Germany. Now I'll tell you, millions of people go see it every year. Millions. And it's probably not even an ancient artifact. It's amazing what they've done to misrepresent this story. And so they have an incredible marriage, a wonderful marriage, these two. And Akhenaten has another wife by the name of Kia. Kia is probably the mother of Tutankhamun. And you'll also see some of the children that Akhenaten has with Nefertari, including Ankh-Senamun, who actually becomes the wife of Tutankhamun. Unfortunately, they were not able to bear children. And so the throne, their line ends there. Come on in, folks. We're going to talk briefly about Kemetic spirituality here, I think. This is probably a good place to do it. Now, I want you to get a sense of the way that Kemetic spirituality, that sort of the concept of Kemetic spirituality, that, you know, there's this one divine force that differentiates itself and acts on our behalf in different places. And so as you look at these descriptions, you'll see a wonderful description of Ptah. Say Ptah with me.
Ptah.
Ptah. Does that symbol look familiar to you at all? Yeah. Now, you have to say that nice and loud. You can't keep that to yourself. That's the Oscars. Now, does anyone watch the Oscar Award? Mm-hmm. That's actually where they get the design from. And the thing I find very interesting is that, you know, they don't really say it, but clearly some of the greatest accomplishments of the Western world are actually signed with the names of your mother and father. And so you should recognize when they're referencing you, right? I mean, I would hope that you'd want to. Let's see if I can get you an image of the Oscar Award so that you can see. Here we go. Nope, wait, wrong one. Here we go. I know some of you are not into this, so you don't know what it looks like. Take a look at these two together. Wow. And so then you get a sense of exactly how some of the most important symbols of Western civilization are actually based on African civilization. And as long as you don't know who you are, they're not going to tell you. They're not going to tell you. So it's critically important for you to recognize these things. In addition, you'll see this incredible lady here. This is a version of Ast. Say Ast with me. Ast. You can also say Osset. That's a fair way. Remember I told you the Kemetic language doesn't use many vowels, right? And so because it doesn't use many vowels, we insert vowels in order to speak it. I say Ast. You can also say Osset. People will argue for hours about which one's correct, when in actuality we don't really know which one's correct. We do know that they're better than saying the Greek version, which is Isis. Now recognize, I have a really good friend who is African-centered and went to get a tattoo and had a beautiful depiction of Oz, and underneath she wrote Isis. She kept asking me what I thought. I said, the artwork is beautiful. He said, look at how he did the words. Isn't that beautiful too? And I was like, So finally she said, something's wrong with this and you're not telling me. And I said, I didn't want to tell you that you wrote a Greek name on there, but you know, you should. She was heated. She didn't speak to me for about a week. You know, so, but anyway, recognize that when you understand the names of your ancestors, you'll use them, right? Now you'll have to know the name Isis. I'm not saying for you to not remember the name, because when you do additional research, that's what you're gonna have to look for. Now I'm gonna tell you that the practice of the worship of As was very prevalent at the end of ancient Kemetic civilization. And so when foreign rulers came in, they actually took the practice of the worship of Ast all over the world. And once again, now we've found what seems to be a remnant of a temple in Germany. It's possible that it traveled all the way to India. There are temples to Ast everywhere. The largest temple outside of Kemet was in a place that would later be known as France. When they built their capital city, on the ruins of that temple, they actually seem to have named the city after the temple. What is the Kemetic word for temple? Per.
Per.
So they call that space Per Isis. So the name of the world, one of the world's finest cities, Paris, secrets the name of your African mother. You have to know this story in order to understand your position in society. And for thousands of years, you were revered. This is an image of Ast here with her son, whose name was Heru. And you know that this is also the archetype for the Madonna and Child statue that goes into Christianity. So recognize that these symbols are still amongst us in places that most people would rather not acknowledge. As we talk about the Oscar Award and Ast. And here goes the child of Ptah and Sekhmet, known as Nefertem, which is also another important statue. I'm not going to talk about Nefertem as much. I do want to talk to you a little bit about this statue here. Does anyone know what that is? Who that is? Sekhmet? Sekhmet? Right. Sekhmet. You can say Sekhmet. I say it differently. I'm not saying what you said is wrong. Remember, we're sticking the vowels in, right?
Absolutely.
Now, you want to tell us something about Sekhmet?
From what I remember, she's a goddess of healing. They associate her with war as well. She was consort to Ra.
Well, some people say she was his daughter. Right. She's talented. This is a very important understanding of Sekhmet. Please give her a hand. Please give her a hand. Because she's doing some research. Sekhmet is the daughter of Ra, and in one great story when Ra decides that humanity had actually strayed too far, he said, I actually want to destroy those evildoers so that the people who are practicing Ma'at will continue and live, right? So he sends his daughter Sekhmet to destroy humanity. It's a story that's similar in some ways to the flood. And so if you want to learn more about this story, it's a really interesting story. Of course, Sekhmet actually becomes bloodthirsty and goes too far. And so Ra has to send Tehuti. Say Tehuti with me. Tehuti. You probably have heard the word Thoth, right? Which is where we get the word thought from, by the way. You should know. He sends Tehuti to placate Sekhmet. He actually pours wine into the Hapi River. He says, look, that's the blood of the evildoer. So she drinks it and becomes intoxicated. And then she reverts to another form of Sekhmet, which is known as Bast. Bast is the cat, the motherly form. So there are two sides. Some people today who are practitioners say that those are actually two sides of every woman as well. And I'll tell you, sometimes they'll talk about the Sekhmet energy. I just looked at a documentary the other day about an old Italian lady whose son was fixing an old Buick, not one of those new cars made out of fiberglass. One of those old cars. Yeah, and so he wanted to get up under in the wheel area. And, you know, he didn't have a jack, a proper jack. He put it like on a cinder block and was up in there hammering it. What do you think happened? The car fell on him. About literally 1.5 tons was crushing him. He was dying. His friends realized that he was not long for this earth. Ran to get an ambulance, ran to call the doctor. When they got back, guess what they saw? This old Italian lady was holding the car up. And so that's why they saved him and he made a full recovery. Later they said, how did you lift the car? It was 1.5 tons. She said, I did what? I don't know. Some people say that's the Sekhmet energy that every woman has within them, especially when their children are in jeopardy. Let's move back out to it. I think I found a name for the entire continent yet. When I do, I'll let you know. Because trust me, I'm going to be yelling it from the rooftops. But obviously we had names that were not
Because on the stele has
Tameri. Right. Tameri is really a section of Africa. I don't think it's the entire section. Now, what are you seeing here? You are so lucky to be able to have these artifacts in your backyard. This is actually the largest section of the temple from a 19th dynasty king. by the name, now his name is rendered in two different ways. Either Meron Ptah or Meron Ptah is the way I usually say it. Now I can't remember how the other one is. But essentially you're seeing a very important king. Why? His father was an extremely powerful king. Who was Meron Ptah's father? Who's probably the king that you're most familiar with other than Tutankhamun? I know he knows the answer already. Ramses II, that was his father. Now Ramses II, Rameses is probably how his name was probably the continued birth of Ra. Rameses is probably how his name is rendered. Rameses actually stays on the throne for over 60 years and has well over 100 children. So he lives for so long that many of his children predecease him. So Meron Ptah is actually his 13th son. That's how old he is. And it's believed that Meron Ptah might have even been in his 50s or 60s by the time he comes to the throne. That's how long Rameses is on the throne. But you're seeing a section of his temple. Now his name Meron Ptah means what? Does anybody know what it means? Because I hope you understand that Kemetic names are kind of a sentence. They don't name people like they name inanimate objects. They talk to you about who you are and what you should be, what you must be. What is your destiny? What have been put on this physical plane to bring forth into excellence? That is what they name them. And so Mer, in this instance, is not the Mirkut. It's Mer means love. Mer is the word for love. Mer in Ptah, which means beloved of Ptah. And so you'll see images of Ptah. Take a look at this one here. This is a pristinely carved version of Ptah right here. And you'll see that while Ptah is here, he is actually giving, what is this symbol here, young man? Do you remember the name? Oh, wow, he's good. He's really good. The Ankh. Here's the symbol of the Ankh. And it's a symbol for everlasting life. And then on the bottom of the Ankh is a symbol that is known as the Jed. Does anyone know what the Jed is?